On a day marked by infamy, September 11, 1973, not only reshaped the skyline of New York decades later, but also cast a long shadow over Chile, where General Augusto Pinochet seized power through a violent coup. Under Pinochet's iron-fisted rule, Chile became a land where dissent was silenced with terrifying efficiency. Political opponents, deemed subversive threats to the state, were detained, tortured, and disappeared without a trace in clandestine operations meant to cleanse the nation of ideological impurity. Though a lesser-known dictator, the crimes of Pinochet are some of the most vicious. Weaponized abuse, punishment, murder, and exile. No one was safe from his anger or suspicion. Anyone could fall victim to his oppressive regime, and many still bear the scars today. On September 5, 1970, a new dawn seemed on the horizon for Chile, as newly elected socialist president Salvador Allende promised a fair and equal society, free of oppression and poverty. But for all his grand ideals, Allende's vision would never be realized. As was the case with many democratically elected socialist governments in Latin America, the USA feared it was the first step in the road to communism, bringing America's greatest enemy ever closer to home. The USA used economic sabotage to weaken Allende's government and sow discontent. After Allende had won the election but not yet taken office, US President Richard Nixon ordered the overthrow of the new president, for which there was a budget of $10 million, over $80 million in 2024. To allow a coup to occur, the CIA needed a sympathetic man at the head of the Chilean army. General René Schneider was the commander-in-chief and was a staunch constitutionalist, unable to be convinced to overthrow the democratically elected government. CIA operatives approached Chilean officers believed to be against the new government who might be willing to kidnap Schneider, offering them $50,000, submachine guns, and tear gas to carry out the attack. Schneider was eventually murdered, but this only rallied the Chilean people around Allende, making a coup even less likely. In 1973, after 3 years of operations, the CIA's wishes would be granted in the way of Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet was a career soldier, first joining the army in 1937. He quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the commander-in-chief in 1973. He used his position to organize a violent overthrow of the Allende government. The coup began on the 11th of September 1973 and ended with the death of Allende and the capture of the Palacio de la Moneda, the home of the President of Chile. Despite the United States' previous attempt to instigate a coup, the CIA denied any direct involvement, even in its internal documents. Following the coup, a military junta was established. The government was composed of the heads of all branches of the military and gendarmes, with the top position rotating through the heads of the Army, Air Force, Navy, and gendarmes. Pinochet, as head of the oldest branch, the Army, was the first to rule, though he soon consolidated his power and made himself the permanent leader of the junta. The first aim of Pinochet was to destroy all left-wing opposition. This included members of the various leftist parties, many liberal-minded professionals and intellectuals, and even disgruntled workers, who were branded as leftist agitators and militants. Thousands were killed and exiled, while tens of thousands were imprisoned without trial and punished. All opposition, real and imagined, was destroyed in one way or another. Political freedoms were limited, trade unions were banned entirely, and Parliament was permanently dissolved. The president of the Human Rights Foundation claimed Pinochet had made Chile his own personal sultanate. Caravan of Death. The Caravana de la Muerte, Caravan of Death, was a death squad ordered to cleanse Chile of extremists. The group traveled the length and breadth of the country, visiting prisons and ordering or carrying out executions of prisoners. The group was known for its extreme violence. It operated in the early days of the junta from the 30th of September to the 22nd of October, 1973, and killed at least 75. Illustrating the brutality of the Caravan of Death, General Joaquin Lagos said about some of its victims, "I was ashamed to see them. They were torn into pieces. Their eyes were gouged out with knives, their jaws broken, their legs broken. They were merciless. The prisoners were killed so that they would die slowly. Only a month following the coup, the Caravan of Death was formed and sent to the north of Chile in search of opponents. Some were signed-up members of leftist groups, while many were simply unhappy, non-violent civilians. The names of suspected subversives were published in the Diario Oficial, the official government newspaper, and then broadcast over the radio. Many of those named, who believed they had no reason to hide, offered themselves up willingly to the authorities. In 4 days, 68 people had been killed. Authorities refused to allow families a proper burial, and the dead were hidden in a mass grave. In one instance, a 17-year-old girl heard her name called on the radio and handed herself in. She was brutally punished, including having her genitals electrocuted, leading to her child being born with serious brain damage. One of the caravan's most famous victims was Winston Cabello, former advisor for former President Allende. He was arrested the day after the coup and held for 5 weeks in a military garrison, detained along with other political prisoners. After 5 weeks in custody, he was told his case had been reviewed, and he was due to be released. Men arrived to collect Cabello and 12 other prisoners, who were loaded into a military vehicle, driven out into the secluded countryside, and executed. Unlike many victims of the regime, Cabello would eventually receive some semblance of justice. Eventually. Zita Cabello Barueta, Winston's sister, discovered her brother's killer was living safely in Miami some 27 years later. She filed a civil suit, and in 2003, a jury found Armando Fernandez Larios guilty and responsible for the death of her brother. He was ordered to pay the families $4 million in damages. Operation Condor. The Pinochet regime collaborated with its fellow military regimes in the rest of Latin America to squash all resistance in the continent and eliminate Marxist subversion. Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru, Uruguay, and Chile all coordinated to imprison and kill anyone who might endanger their regimes. The operation had the tacit approval of and received material aid from the United States. The official plan was formed on the 25th of November 1975, on Pinochet's 60th birthday. Representatives from Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay convened in Chile to formulate their new operation. Trade unionists, students, political activists, and intellectuals were targeted, imprisoned, punished, and murdered. The first international evidence of these abuses came in 1977 when extreme stormy weather caused dozens of corpses to wash up on the beaches of Buenos Aires, all bearing the scars of the punishment. The real revelation would come in 1992 as a Paraguayan judge requested records from a police station on political prisoners. He inadvertently discovered the Archivos do Terror, or Archives of Terror. This archive included 4 tons of documents, over 500,000 pages, all discussing the treatment and fate of thousands of political prisoners, detained and murdered under Operation Condor. The archives also detailed plans to assassinate opponents of the regime elsewhere, such as the UK, France, Italy, and the USA. The operation formally ended in 1983, after the defeat of Argentina in the Falklands War and the collapse of its military junta. The Archives of Terror have been used as evidence by many Latin American countries to help secure conviction of guilty participants. Punishment. Punishment was the favored tactic of the Pinochet regime. It was not used to extract information, but as a method of enforcing compliance through fear, and over 30,000 were tortured during the regime. Villa Grimaldi, a prison camp operated by Dirección de Inteligencia Nacional, or DINA, was notorious for the abuses that went on within its walls. 4,500 people were detained here during its 4-year operation, with at least 240 disappeared, which in most cases means murdered. Prisoners were brought in for interrogation, but then held for prolonged periods, never made aware of the charges they were potentially facing. The tower was the most inhumane area of the prison, with its dedicated punishment room, and housed only the most important prisoners. Within the tower were 10 cells, measuring 2 meters high and 70 centimeters wide and deep, large enough only to stand in, a vicious form of punishment in itself. These standing cells were also used in Nazi concentration camps and Soviet gulags. and prisoners could be forced to stand inside them in total darkness for days on end. Lilia Perez was one victim of Via Grimaldi, first punished by the regime at the age of 16. She and 10 of her classmates were captured and detained in the National Stadium. She was not even asked a single question. At the same time, Chilean soldiers electrocuted her with cattle prods, with their officers teaching them the best techniques and how to properly apply their instruments of punishment. She endured 5 days of this until she was released back on the street, with absolutely no explanation. 2 years later, the police came for her a second time. She was taken to Via Grimaldi, some 30 minutes outside of Santiago. She was imprisoned for over 2 months, during which she endured endless interrogation, consisting mostly of electrical shock punishment. Immediately after her arrival, Perez and her husband were strapped to the grill and forced to watch as the other one was punished, during a session that lasted 8 hours. Near the end of her stay, she was tied to a tree and beaten. Barely escaping Grimaldi with her life, she spent the next year in a labor camp, eventually escaping the country in 1976. Sexual violence was common in the prison. Women were violated or had their genitals electrocuted, whilst men were assaulted to emasculate them and force them into submission. Luz de las Nieves Eres Moreno was a socialist activist who was detained, aged 25, in 1974. Before the coup, she had fought with communist insurgents in Bolivia, and so was destined for imprisonment. In 1974, after some time in hiding, Eres and her father and brother were taken into captivity. Eres wrote openly about her fate, allowing the world to know of the atrocities committed. "This is how Pinochet punished me. They took me prisoner with my father and my 15-year-old brother Tato. They threw me on the floor covered with water and applied electric shock to my entire body, but especially the breasts, vagina, anus, eyes, mouth, and neck. They pulled my nipples and made cuts with knives and razors. They violated my vagina with their filthy hands, bottles, fingers, sticks, things made out of metal. Along with electrocution, abuse, food deprivation, and routine beatings, she also suffered cruel treatment almost exclusive to the dictatorial regimes of Chile and Argentina, a form of rat punishment, referred to as the rectoscope. She would be laid onto a table, with prison guards pulling on her limbs and spreading her legs. They would then insert a live rat into a body orifice, using a length of tubing. In total, she spent 40 months in captivity, 3 months of which were in total solitary confinement. Her story was one of the first to make it outside of Chile, as a note from Aeres describing her imprisonment was smuggled out of the prison. One of the most recognizable images of the Pinochet regime is that of the death flights. These death flights were used both as a method of execution and a way to dispose of executed prisoners. Victims, whether alive or dead, were tied to a length of steel bar and fastened inside cloth sacks. They were shuttled in a pickup truck to a waiting helicopter and forced inside. The helicopter would head either for the highest peaks of the Andes or the coast of Valparaiso, where the victims, dead or alive, were then thrown overboard. Pinochet's personal helicopter pilot admitted to taking part in these death flights, and it is believed 120 people were killed this way. Osvaldo Romo, a high-ranking agent of DINA, said in a 1995 interview regarding his actions during the regime, "Now would it not be better throwing bodies into a volcano?" The Pinochet regime fell in 1990, though Pinochet continued to have considerable influence within Chile. Unfortunately, for all those who suffered abuses or lost loved ones, Pinochet died in 2006, having spent most of his life after the dictatorship living in relative peace and comfort, never being convicted of a single crime.